All right, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the first SQAB tutorial, first of a series of SQAB tutorials. My name is Sanabria. I am the current president of SQAB, and it is my distinct honor to introduce Dr. Chris Franck. Dr. Franck is associate professor in the Department of Statistics at Virginia Tech. His work is focused on the assessment of probability forecasts arising from machine learning and from humans. And he's also interested in Bayesian statistics with an emphasis on health applications. And today he's going to be speaking about the changing roles of statistical analysis, computation, and artificial intelligence in behavior science. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Chris Franck.
Thanks. Hello, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Fed. I'm honored to be here to give this tutorial today. This tutorial, just by way of background, started as a little bit of a discussion in July 2024. So I was discussing with Associate Editor Andy Craig and Editor Suzanne Mitchell some of the papers that have been coming into JAB. And what we kind of noticed is recently there had been increasingly a couple of things happening. More sophisticated statistical and computational approaches were being proposed. And we were getting to the point where also increased use of simulated data was being incorporated. And we were reaching a point where some manuscripts were being proposed that had no data from living organisms even included in the analysis, purely simulation-based data, which, by the way, isn't entirely unusual depending on what field you're in. But I know that in behavior science, we're in a field where studying the behavior of living organisms is central to the entire endeavor. So we had sort of seen this shift in computation going across time, which on the whole is hopefully a good thing. Throughout the history of behavior analysis, there's been a continuing awareness of the role of statistics and statistical inference in the analysis of behavior as well. So that's kind of been going on for a long time. And then most recently, what I think people are most preoccupied with today, like nothing I just talked about in those last few sentences is like getting daily headlines in the national news. But this last bit, the tectonic shifts of modern AI, everybody, your parents know about this stuff, right? Everybody knows about what's going on here. And the role that's going to play both in behavior science and also in the process of doing the scientific enterprise with peer review and these sorts of things is certainly a pressing issue for all. And I'd like to announce I'm under no contractual obligation to resolve any of these things today. And the reason why is these are issues for the community to answer for and address. It's not up to one person to say what the right way for things to go are, but I was sort of asked to, and I think it's a great idea, to bring up these issues as things that we kind of need to resolve as we think about behavior science going forward as a discipline. This tutorial was organized with a follow-up panel in mind, which is actually later today. We've got the SQAB panel, the role of computation in behavior science, a panel and audience discussion coming up. We've got three excellent panelists, Andy Craig, Sean Gilroy, Sam Morris, and Suzanne Mitchell has agreed to be the discussant, the discussant. That's today, 4 p.m., I think in this very room as it happens. So hopefully, if you don't have something else to do at 4 p.m., you should come check out this panel, which I think is going to be absolutely excellent. I asked the speakers on that panel to give us a little bit of an idea of it's an audience discussion, so they can certainly discuss more than this. But I asked them kind of going in, what would you like to talk about? And Andy was talking about correspondence between actual behavioral processes, common ancestors, when actually dealing with convergent evolution. Sean, who's in the back there, is going to be a panelist. He has a lot to say about access of relevant training in mentorship and statistics and or computer science applications. Limits of LLMs and AI is a first-line support for developing and undertaking a statistical project. I can't wait for that point, for sure. But then, of course, ethical and pragmatic considerations of large... LLM stands for large language models. That's like ChatGPT, these sorts of modern chatbots. So ethical and pragmatic considerations there. And then Sam has agreed to talk to us a little bit about artificial organisms and the role that they can play in behavior analysis among some of the other points. So that panel ought to be really excellent, and I'll hope to see you there. Just a little bit more about me. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Statistics at Virginia Tech. I'm a statistician by training. If you know anything that I do in behavior analysis, I owe a great debt of gratitude to my wonderful co-authors. I feel honored to be kind of included in this community and have the chance to participate at all. So I just wanted to say that if I describe any behavior science concepts in a slightly clumsy way, I hope you'll forgive me. So I've got a couple of different parts corresponding to statistics, computation, and AI, which I'm going to kind of go through piece by piece here. For statistics, I think everybody here knows some statistics. Everybody here's seen a statistics textbook. But I thought an interesting way to frame the statistics part of the talk was what was actually going on with statisticians during the era that behavior science was coming online as well. And it turns out there's this book is a page turner, and I'm not just saying that because I love statistics. It's truly the popular press version of what was going on with statistics in the 20th century, the sorts of problems that people were encountering. By the way, many of the people in this book that we think of as statisticians, there were departments of statistics in these eras. So they for example, William Seeley Gossett, who came up with a T distribution he was brewing beer for Guinness Brewery, all right, and he was a chemist by training. Okay, so we think of this great statistician, but this is about the field kind of getting started. Just a couple of other things. There's about what was going on. R.A. Fisher developed an exact test, but he was based on a bet. They were having a bet as to, they're over in the UK, and they're trying to figure out, can you tell the difference if you pour the tea first or the milk first? And you can only drink so much tea in a sitting. So rather than get a great big sample size or something like this, they developed a small sample test based on a bet to resolve that. So Fisher's exact test was actually based on a bet about drinking tea. There's another one that I wasn't familiar with. There's this individual, Chester Bliss. So he was an agriculturist studying insecticide. So if you give a little bit of poison to an insect, not many of them die. You give more poison, begins to go up, but it gets saturated and eventually 100% of the insects die. So this was the individual who's developing these S-curves for you thinking about dosage and stuff like that. So that's what he was doing technically, but he followed a woman he was interested over to the Soviet Union in an era where that was a risky choice. Because what happened was the Communist Party was interviewing his landlord, his boss, his girlfriend, and him in fear they might be a spy. And you've got to read this account. It turns out his behavior was so unsubtle. They were interviewing him like, are you a spy for the United States? And he would interrupt them and say, I think that your agricultural processes surrounding insecticide are incorrect. And if that's your party line, I want no part of it. These sorts of things. You can read the exact quotes. They figure this guy couldn't possibly be a spy. They send him home. His landlord, his boss, and his girlfriend are never seen again. So there's all of these incredible stories about what was going on in the field of statistics. Everybody here knows a lot about the history of behavior science, but this is just such a wonderful description of what how the field of statistics came along. I wanted to share it, and I also wanted to throw out the field. This is quite a wonderful subtitle: How Statistics Revolutionized Science in the 20th Century. And in many ways, statistics did a good job in the 20th century. But I do think it's fair to say that when it comes to behavior science, there are reasons that I'll get into where maybe not as many statistical contributions were made as early. And I think a lot of it comes down to what statistical techniques have been widely available to data analysts and when. So just as a time reference, B.F. Skinner got his PhD in 1931 and remained active to his death in 1990. So throughout much of that era, let's think about what statistical techniques were available. Now, what I'm about to say is a gross oversimplification. Statisticians would get mad at me, but I think it's a helpful one. We're not talking about every single thing that academic statisticians were thinking about and working on. We're talking about what tools were available to data analysts in all fields to analyze their data. Many of those tools assume data come from a normal distribution or use large sample results to talk about confidence intervals and tests based on statistics. So the ability to account for non-normal data while having predictors in your model, that's generalized linear models. That theory was really devised in the 1970s, not readily available until the 80s and 90s when everybody had a desktop computer available. So if the data isn't normal, you're kind of, I don't want to say you're waiting around for the 1980s and 90s, but it wasn't very easy to fit those models. You have some sorts of count-based data or binary outcome data. You can't really fit the model to explain what predictors are influencing that until much later on. Lots of zeros in behavior. Sometimes organisms don't do much under certain conditions. There's lots of zeros. So zero-inflated models weren't developed until the 1990s. They also require a computer to be fit conveniently. When I say a computer can fit it conveniently, I'm saying if you've got a spreadsheet of data, the computer can, the statistical algorithm can learn from that data to give you an estimate of the parameters that are going on. So not until the 1990s. And of course, we all know that if you have observations on a certain organism, then follow-up observations on that same organism are probably associated with each other, but perhaps one organism's observations are not associated with another. The idea is mixed models. It's useful for characterizing correlation within data, among other things. Again, not really available till the 1990s. So here's a few charts of behavioral data that are near and dear to my heart. This is a figure from my collaborator Joel Ringdahl, who I'm very glad to see is here today. So this is data for a behavior study. Up here we've got challenging behavior per minute, and down here we've got the independent communications per minute. So these are like count data and rate data. So if you took an off-the-shelf statistical model even today and just ran it into your computer and didn't tell it to do something fancier, it would be assuming constant variance. It would be assuming the residuals are going to be a normal distribution, these sorts of things. And throughout the time course of this data, where we've got some functional training and then disruption eventually, we're seeing like zero variance at some parts. We're seeing massive variance at other parts. Spoiler alert, if you fit a standard model with these data, the departures from the model predictions are not going to follow a normal distribution. So, this, which I see as, it's a modern study, but these are the sorts of behaviors that you could be tracking throughout the history of behavior analysis. And it really kind of is true that convenient ways of analyzing it responsibly from a statistical aspect historically hadn't been available until behavior science had been underway for decades. So I think that that's kind of one issue. Also, here's a delay discounting study. This is a paper I wrote with my PhD student and my good friend and collaborator, Mickey Coffernis. Here's just some delay discounting data. And if you just, again, fit standard models, like if you're doing maximum likelihood or something, it'll presume the data come from a normal distribution. Well, here the curves of that normal distribution kind of go off the range of the observed data. So that's just a little bit of tension. So I'm saying I'm guilty of this too, right? I've analyzed papers where maybe not the most statistical care had been developed for different sorts of things. But good news, we've got some new ways of handling this. We've got this. There's this technique called beta regression. We came up with a special tweak on it. But here's a similar delay discounting series with a different error distribution is one way of thinking of it, and it follows the beta distribution. And you can see that the density on that actually obeys the bounds on which the data are observed. So that's kind of cool. I think the future is kind of bright here. Behavior science values descriptive analysis, which is really good. I thought it was, what's it called? The intraocular trauma test. It's a great way. Like statisticians aren't good at naming stuff. We would just say descriptive statistics, and people's eyes begin to, maybe glaze over a little bit. But then to call it the intraocular trauma test, which just means you look at a plot of the data and see what's going on, I think is terrific. So behavior science values those descriptive statistics. But increasingly also statistical inference is available as an alternative. Here's a convenient sample of different papers. Many are kind of being developed all the time to try to, what we're trying to do is get the most information out of the data that behavior scientists gather at great time, great effort, and great expense. So we're hoping to have some statistical methods that can generate more insight, more value, and honor the scales upon which those data are gathered and the studies that are organized to gather those data. So that's what I want to say about statistics. There's a bit of a history there, and it's interesting to think of it like two separate paths, maybe hopefully coming together. For computational methods, I'm going to say a little bit about this. I started talking a little bit about simulated data in studies, and this is something that is really cool. So in my era, I didn't begin to learn about this until I was working on a PhD in statistics. But now our STEM undergrads totally get this concept. So it's quite incredible. Commonly, when we here's what I would say a typical data analysis is. You've got some cutting edge science, some cutting edge behavior science. So you gather mysterious data. Maybe I'll put organisms in a couple of different conditions and see if they differ by group based on some outcome. So that's kind of the mysterious part. You've got a good scientific intuition for why you're doing that study. But once we have that data, we want to use a well-vetted statistical technique to do the comparison, right? So I would call that the common data analysis pipeline. Use well-understood methods to analyze data that arise from a question that's advancing science. But what happens when analysts start arguing about which method should they or shouldn't they use? So it turns out Monte Carlo simulation is an extremely powerful method that can help us have insight to the opposite sort of problem. Now, the mystery is which model is the best to fit, which approach is the best to fit. I got a new idea for a computational style approach, and I want to know if it's any good. So check this out. What you do is you generate data where the underlying structure is known. So I'll just simulate a bunch of data where secretly, unlike real life, secretly I know the answer, right? I generate all these data, I keep the answer separate, and then I use different methods on that data and see which method is the best at recovering the answer that is secretly known to me. It's a great way to test new computational approaches. It's a great way to inform debates. You do this for many data sets, right? So that's the convenience of it. I know it takes a lot of real effort to analyze data from organisms out of the lab. Simulated data you can generate as much as you want as quickly as you want, which is a little bit of a different flavor. So for this reason, we generate many data sets and summarize the long-run performance of methods in that way. It's named Monte Carlo for the casino in Monaco, right? The idea that we're essentially gambling over and over and over again to figure out what the rate of things that happen. And I'll highlight this paper. I have fond memories of this one. By the way, this is a paper that I wrote with Mickey Koffernis and Warren Bickel and Jeff Stein, and we were comparing whether or not it's a good idea to exponentiate the demand model by Stephen Hirsch, the Hirsch and Silberberg model. Now, there was a session that Steve gave yesterday about the continuing on, like what model's actually the best for that. So that debate rages on. I like this one, but people are still thinking about demand models now. I'm bringing this slide up to specifically talk about the role of Monte Carlo simulation. So we have one well-established model that everybody knows and loves. Really what we did is it's the same model, we just exponentiated the function before fitting the model. The reason why is because we don't want to have to throw zeros out. You can't log a zero, and that Hirsch-Silberberg equation's on a log scale. So it turns out Mickey, on the same day, Mickey and I said, if we exponentiate this, we can have the zeros in the data, right? And this is a long time ago, but my memory is I described to Mickey, we could do a Monte Carlo simulation to see which method performs better, because now the debate isn't about demand data, it's about which model's better. So my recollection is I mentioned this idea to Mickey. Maybe he already knew about it. He's extremely smart. But basically overnight he did the whole simulation in like Microsoft Excel, and I come in the next day prepared to explain more, and he's basically already done the simulation. And that's what this red circles are showing us. When it comes to demand elasticity, on the far left, the true value alpha of a demand elasticity. This is something we never have when we gather data from organisms because we don't know it, we're trying to learn it. But through the power of simulation, now secretly we know it. And our exponentiated model is very close to that, right? So this was an argument that, well, if a lot of data comes from the model we say it's coming from, our approach to analyzing things recovers the correct demand elasticity. If you delete your zeros, it's not as good. And then if you impute your zeros, you get variable performance, right? Same thing or similar for demand intensity. If the truth were known, we can recover it. If you delete your zeros, your idea about observed zeros, your demand intensity is further from the truth, which we know because we simulated it, and imputation, again, has lots of variability. So it's one thing to argue about what method is better or not, or to have a theory about why one method's better or not. But the amazing thing is, this is actually, it meets the criteria for a scientific experiment. We experimented on the models. So I think Monte Carlo simulation is a really powerful tool that can be used and has been used increasingly in all sorts of different fields. Again, when you have that issue, we're trying to figure out how to analyze data. How would different methods perform if we knew the truth? That's the idea of Monte Carlo simulation. That's just one type of simulation. I'm going to very briefly touch on a couple of others. Sam Morris on the panel later today. I tried to get an understanding of what's going on here. I got to hit the books and go to this panel session this afternoon. So he's talking about animating artificial organisms through more complex generative processes. I said tomorrow's panel, but I wrote this yesterday, so it's really this afternoon's panel. So come check that out. I think the basic idea is that you simulate the behavior of the organism itself, and then how to tie that to behavior of living organisms, I don't know. I say let's go ask Sam. There's also computer simulation in general. So for example, when I was a undergraduate statistician, I was talking to a professor who I really looked up to and said, what are you going to work on this summer? This was Christine Anderson Cook, who since went to Los Alamos National Labs, and she's like, I'm going to figure out how long the components of satellites are going to last. And I think it's a trick question, right? Nobody in Blacksburg, Virginia is going to launch enough satellites into the atmosphere and follow them long enough and gather the data to be able to do that, right? And she's like, well, we're going to do a computer simulation. So just for situational awareness, there are fields where we wish we could do that exact thing, and believe me, if we had unlimited satellites, a huge number of satellites, and unlimited time, we'd send them up and watch them. But we got to launch some sort of satellites, so maybe we get ourselves informed by the simulation, again, to help us make the best possible guess and in concert with other sorts of things. So for the behavior science community, I just described a situation where there are fields where all you get is simulated data, but I just see how hard behavior scientists work at gathering data from living organisms, and I think we should kind of be thinking about what's the real interplay going to be. A tremendous strength in this area is the amount of data that's being generated directly on the things that we're interested in. We want to make sure that we maximize that. For the artificial intelligence portion of the talk, I've broken it down into sort of two pieces. Now we're getting onto some things that actually like were on the news, So early on when artificial intelligence came on, now I think lots of people who are studying science are thinking about how to do it. For the first time, people in my life who were like my family members and friends who weren't in STEM were asking, is this what you do? It's like, oh, kind of, but it's a little, and I'd already lost their attention span. They were looking for yes, no. So I figured, boy, maybe we better try to make this a yes. Artificial intelligence began really creeping into the public perception. I think maybe this is just, me growing up, but I remember in 1996, 1998, 2000, Amazon was doing this big online, going beyond books and doing all sorts of different product sales and things like this. And one of the things that they did, at least more visibly than other companies were doing, and I think to a greater scale, is they were gathering data on every single aspect of the enterprise. So in this era, we were talking a lot about big data was a big buzzword. Do you remember that? It used to be like, you'd just say big data and it was like license to win the debate, unless you were talking to somebody who had bigger data, and then, somehow that was the thing. So we'll say a little bit about this. And I've got a session I'll mention tomorrow that about in behavior science. I looked on the program, a number of them have already happened, but there's at least one more you can check out. Even before like ChatGPT and large language models, machine learning and artificial intelligence changing science and society. So I don't know if you've seen this plot before. The first time I saw this, again, the sorts of deep learning and machine learning techniques weren't available when I was a student. So the first time I saw this, you're kind of like, oh, well, older learning algorithms, statistical regression, generalized linear models, basic statistical analyses, fitting curves to data. In the context of this discussion, is considered an older learning algorithm. Things that use least squares or maximum likelihood for small to moderate sized data. Again, air quotes, because this is the big data era that we're talking about now. So I don't know. I'm curious. Have folks seen this slide before? Anybody seen this plot? So the basic idea is that if you have data from, I'll use statistics as an example. A lot of statistics grow out of agriculture. Spend all season trying to get a few fields worth of data, and you're thankful if you can get that. One bad weather event, and maybe you got nothing. Okay, so small data that was extremely difficult to collect. You had to do a lot of work to get it. Behavior science maybe has some parallels with that. You go into the lab every day and keep up with your studies. The idea is that for data in this size, older learning algorithms, which were devised to operate well on that scale, tend to outperform deep learning. But like when you get to the point where, I like this curve because it's like deep learning for small data isn't what you'd even really think to do, at least the mainstream approach to deep learning. If you're doing small data deep learning, then you'd be off the beaten path in the context of this slide, because you can't even do deep learning according to this for small data. But the idea is that there gets to be this point at which, like a typical statistical technique, the confidence interval would be hyper narrow and every single test would reject, and you could still fit models and do estimation, but the idea is that these deep learning algorithms can do much better out of sample prediction. So one subtlety belied by this plot is, I think this is true for a lot of the statistical work I've done historically, many statisticians have done historically, and I think for behavior science too, there's a focus on explaining what's actually going on, posing a model, figuring out what the underlying process is. We want to estimate the parameters of the model. We want to test theories with hypothesis testing or similar. We want some interval estimates. And we want to be able to make prediction, but the emphasis is really on interpretation. What does the model, why is the model saying I'm likely or unlikely to have a heart attack in the next 5 years, right? So to take it out of behavior science into medicine for a minute, older learning algorithms have coefficients that are estimated. You can learn that. Black box machine learning, which starts, to my way of thinking, tree-based methods, neural nets, you get to a point where out of sample, they're going to predict much better. You have much better out of sample prediction than the older methods, but they're called black box because you don't necessarily know why that's true. So if I were told by my doctor, bad news, you're at high risk for something, I'd want to say, well, how is this my fault? What did I do wrong, and what can I change? Then you have to, if all your, like Amazon's really worried about, and other companies too, they're worried about what they can sell you. They don't need to know how their model works necessarily, other than they want a model that has a really good chance of predicting, what you're going to buy or not. But interpretation or why that's so is a little bit secondary. So these black box machine learning algorithms, like regression has a handful of parameters, slopes and intercepts. These black box algorithms have hundreds or thousands of parameters. We say they're black box and you can't understand them. What does that even mean? It's like, well, okay, here's a list of thousands of parameters and no human can really interpret one of those in isolation. That's what we mean by black box there. There's a relevant AI session in this conference coming up. I'm the discussant on this. It's coming up tomorrow, 8 a.m. So in case that changes your plans for this evening, this one's starting bright and early. I'll see you there. There's computer visions being used, machine learning for vocal stereotypy, and even some transformers, some GBT-style models are being used. Here's a spatiotemporal tracker that uses image classification to see how the rat is going to behave as a spatial reinforcement schedule based on a water dispenser. So this machine learning, not just for analyzing data on the back end, but produces a new type of data that we could begin to study. The speakers are here, so I'm really looking forward to that. You can definitely check it out. That's basically what I had wanted to say about the statistics and the computation part. Now we get to the part where, like, I don't know about you, but it's like good luck trying to get away from talking about the current landscape of artificial intelligence, large language models, these things. I'm going to start by saying I got like 20 minutes, I think. There's no possible way anybody could do justice to this topic in even a full session. But some basic highlights of how things started are in 2017, Google Research published an article called Attention is All You Need. And this is a very deep technical paper, but the core idea is they had this class of transformer models where I'm going to oversimplify here, but the basic goal is just predict the next word. If I give you some unstructured text, predict the next word. And the innovation had to do with this attention mechanism that doesn't only use the last word. So there are things that only use the last word to predict the next one, like Markov chains and things like that. But this has some attention thing that figures out in a large corpus of text data which words kind of go together. So this got published in 2017, and the thing is I remember November 2022 this thing came in. Does anybody in here teach any classes? So everybody here, the look on the faces of people who just raised their hand is statistically different from those who maybe didn't, because this is changing education in an incredible extent. And I don't think anybody really knows where this train is going, can confidently say. People can make predictions, but the confidence around those predictions is wide because nobody really knows where this is going. So it was November 2022 where ChatGPT 3.5 came out. Every single homework assignment I think I've ever written can be solved at least a B level by this thing, which is incredible. People say things I didn't know if I was going to live to see the day, but here we are. Maybe later on, but it's happening now. So that's just a reminder kind of where things have gone. I don't know if this is obvious from my carefree nature, but I am a worrier. I am worried right now, okay? Just saying that slide a minute ago, I got worried again. So when I heard about this, I was telling a former student, I'm so worried about this. He's like, you should check out this, again, another popular perhaps book recommendation, Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick. He's a Wharton professor of business. He studies innovation. And he starts by saying, you're going to have at least 3 sleepless nights when you begin really thinking about what large language models could do, whatever you're doing. You're not even in behavior science necessarily, but like, is your job going to get replaced? How do you raise your kids in this era? All this stuff. So once I heard this book's about 3 sleepless nights of AI, I had to read it. And it's absolutely, I feel much better having read it. So now that I see this, I feel I'm worrying a little bit less. But there's many, many points to this book. I'm going to boil down just a few key points. You have to check this book out. It's also a page turner. One of the things that's incredible is when I say something like, when somebody explained it to me, we're going to explain the next word in structured text, and you actually are going to be confused as to whether it's a human or a computer responding to you. It's going to beat the Turing test. It's one thing to say that. It's another thing to live in a reality where this thing is good at, nobody knows why it's so good at so much stuff. in the book he talks about like the neurosurgery qualifying exam, law school. This tool can like ace those entrance exams. A human studying for all their life, can be competed with by this machine on the entrance exam to a prestigious school. Now the argument is, well, yeah, it's training on all the answers, right? So you can kind of explain it and get it, but it's still remarkable in terms of how that changes everything. So again, lots in the book, but there's sort of 4 possible scenarios from co-intelligence. One is as good as it gets, even if AI stops developing. I'm building this up a little bit because I'm going to talk about AI and behavior science next. So I think that this is a nice way to kind of set the stage for that. So the 4 scenarios that I thought were interesting. One is as good as it gets. So even if, there have been other times, by the way, we learned how to sequence a genome, and I think we were all told in 5 years we're going to have personalized medicine and you're going to know your own genome, and that didn't quite come to pass. They're still working on that, by the way, and that field continues to advance, but it slows down after a breakthrough. So the as good as it gets scenarios is all of our jaws are on the floor about this LLM thing coming out, but in this scenario, things pause for a while and it doesn't immediately become a super intelligent super being. Even if that's true, LLMs are replacing jobs as it stands. A single computer, in my day, being a computer science programmer was like the gold standard major almost in terms of employment and what you might do. And now with this tool, I told it to get in Python and make me a world map and color code every country. And it did it instantly, and it produced the code, and when I ran it through Python, it did it. I said, now make Antarctica white and some other country some other color. It's like, here's how you would change the code, and it does it perfectly, which is incredible. So even if AI slows down, I said stop, but I really just say really slows down its development, and we're really at a technical barrier now, that horse is already out of the barn, and things are going to change a lot. There's 2 other slow growth and exponential growth. I worried my way right past these into the machine god category. Which you can say this a lot of different ways, but the machine gets smarter than us, and then it decides to make a machine smarter than it, and we're obsolete like overnight. It might happen, and smart people are worried about this. I'm quoting Ethan Mollick now. Smart people are truly worried about this being sooner rather than later. But one thing I thought was a beautiful sentiment was, let's not worry too much about this right now. And the reason to try not to worry is it robs us of agency of the choices we have to make as individuals in a society for how we're going to use AI. So at least for now, we still have some say in how this thing's going to be used, and we should focus on the agency we have at this critical moment and not become paralyzed by the possibility of the machine god kind of super intelligent thing happening, which I thought was good. One other thing, I don't know if you've ever used ChatGPT. If you're like me, you remember your first win against ChatGPT. I asked it a question and flummoxed it. And I'm like, I still got it. Right? I asked it, my new mattress smells funny. Should I be worried? And like straight as if it had trained off the owner's manual, it's like, don't worry about that at all. This is an older model now. I'm like, well, I'm worried that if I continue to smell these fumes, then I will turn into a mattress. And GPT 3.5 said, that's just a myth. And I said, what tradition is that myth from? And then it was hallucinating, right? It was saying something with great confidence that isn't actually true. And it said, you're exactly right. It's not a myth at all. That would just forget I said that. I'm completely confident and right all the time. Now that was an older model. Since then, I think it gets that right. But there is this idea that still applies now, which is this jagged frontier, which is it's not obvious to us as humans what the AI should be able to do. I got it to make the world map I wanted very quickly. Somebody who's never coded before, who spends a week with the thing, could get pretty good. But I asked it, full disclosure, this slide number here, I had to put it in Adobe because ChatGPT still can't explain to me how the slide master works in PowerPoint 2016. It won't do it. I even told it I'm using the outdated version of PowerPoint, won't do it. So Microsoft, I think that you have a future developing products to continue to flummox AI. Thank you for that contribution. The idea here is that we have some idea, like you'd think it wouldn't be able to do a very sophisticated program on the basis of an unstructured prompt, but it can. You'd ask it to design the best video game character from a game 20 years old, and it might stumble on that. You'd think that one would be very easy, the other would be hard, but there's this jagged edge of what you think it's capable of, and then what it's actually capable of. We kind of have to test that, and this frontier, of course, will change every couple of months as new models are released. So as that pertains, I'm glad I've already got it. I was worried we were going to be having a pretty rough time in this talk by now, so I'm relieved that we're having a couple of chuckles. But just in case we need to lighten the mood, I have this. This is one thing that the next theme is what are humans supposed to do to enter the job market, and this is one thing that nobody knows what it means to be human anymore, and what another human's going to hire you to do. But here's one thing I think we're not going to be hiring our students, future generations, to do.
Thruster shaft, 87% damage. Aft vector guards, 96% damage. Structural breaches in quadrants 32, 34, 40.
What about the engines?
Forward thruster shaft, 87% damage.
Computer, what about the engines? Why don't we have power?
The beryllium sphere is fractured, under stress.
It's fractured.
Can it be repaired?
Computer, can it be repaired?
Damage to beryllium sphere, irreparable. New source of beryllium must be secured.
We need another one.
You broke the ship. You broke the bloody ship.
Yeah. Computer, is there a replacement beryllium sphere on board?
Computer, is there a replacement beryllium sphere on board?
Negative. No reserve beryllium sphere exists on board.
No, we have no extra beryllium sphere on board.
You know, that is really getting annoying.
Look, I have one job on this lousy ship. It's stupid, but I'm gonna do it, okay? If you want a truly attractive body, make this 5 seconds.
Just so you know, I logged out of my account, so that wasn't directed at me, I presume. Suzanne Mitchell, we were discussing this, had this idea. It's just like that scene in Galaxy Quest. So thanks, Suzanne, for the tip. It's perfect, but we don't quite know what's going on. But I think nobody's going to hire a human to take what the boss says, ask the computer, verbatim take what the computer says, and repeat it back to the boss. That got old in 3 minutes for the crew of Galaxy Quest. So I guess as we're thinking about like the next jobs, when students ask, what should I do to prepare? I say, you get as good as you can at what you do. And be sure that if you're using AI, which by the way, it's getting hard to opt out of because even basic Google searches return AI first now. It's hard to opt out, right? Whatever you do, if the lowest possible benchmark is putting someone else's prompts into the machine and repeating them back, you got to find some way to add some value beyond that. So that's hopefully a humorous way of thinking about our mentees and future generations. So I think with the stage set, I'd like to say a few words about how AI is going to affect scientific publishing. So I borrowed some slides. This is my dear friend and mentor and colleague, Bill Woodall, who is the editor of Quality Engineering. He's a renowned statistician. He gave the Deming Lecture at the Joint Statistical Meetings in 2024, among his many other accolades. So Deming introduced quality control to Japan after World War II, among many other things. It was really all about quality monitoring. And there's a big award in statistics named after that. And Bill won that award. He's now spending a lot of time and energy giving talks and doing research on what's the future of AI as it pertains specifically to scientific publishing. So I was very happy to ask him, hey, can I just borrow a couple slides and ideas from your recent talk to share with behavior scientists? He says, Chris, not only can you use whatever of my slides are helpful, I want you to put my email address on the screen. And anybody who wants to talk at all about this topic should email me. And he meant that earnestly as well. So some of these slides I've borrowed from him, but I think that they really speak a lot to what's going to happen in scientific publishing in general with these sorts of things. A few of the many issues that I'll illustrate in these slides with Bill's help are these. How should AI be used by authors and disclosed? When I was young, we didn't have convolutional neural nets and image classification problems. So when I wanted to do a paper on it, I used ChatGPT to get the Python code to write it, and I carefully vetted it all because I knew how it was supposed to work and stuff like that. And if it weren't for that, then I wouldn't have had an image classification example to then subsequently do statistical modeling on. So how should I disclose that? Using myself as an example. That's one question. How's the broader scientific effort going to resist AI spam? You could put a prompt in, you could ask ChatGPT, what do you want for breakfast? And it'll write you 3 pages and a too long didn't read summary, right? So it can produce voluminous text very quickly. How will abuses and fraud be detected and addressed? Now this is very important because you could have a classifier that's right, 98% of the time when it says that there's fraud. That means 2% of people, if there's a false positive, are going to be accused of AI fraud when they didn't commit it, and that could follow them around forever. So there's the saying, what's the saying? It's better to let 100 guilty people go free than to wrongly prosecute one. We have to think about that. It's hard to detect AI, but it's not impossible. But like, what do you do when you see something suspicious but you can't prove it? When you think about the consequences of being accused of fraud, spurious accusations like that could completely derail a career. AI greatly empowers paper mills, that is organizations that create low quality or fake papers and get them published. What about AI generated reviewer reports? We worry about this world where papers are written predominantly, this is a fear. I said avoid, I should have said like fear too. Papers being predominantly written by AI, reviewed predominantly by AI, and cited prominently by papers that were also written by AI. Now the humans are out of the loop. So that's, how we have to be careful about that, to try to keep that as far-fetched as we can, whether it is or is not. So this slide is basically showing, these are Web of Science paper counts for AI and scientific publishing. This is showing that lots of people across Web of Science are increasingly getting concerned about this problem. Pretty straightforward. AI seeping into academic journals and is proving difficult to detect. So here's a Wired article. Ethics watchdogs are looking out for potentially undisclosed use of generative AI. There's no foolproof way to catch it all yet, right? There's not, an AI system doesn't even know if something was written by AI, right? So unless somebody, and behavior, a little spoiler alert for what I'm getting towards is there's a behavior science element to my way of thinking. Tell me if you agree. Like what sorts of behaviors are going to get reinforced, right? And if it's doing a bunch of AI slop and shooting it to 1 million journals and then 7 of them publish you because they're overworked human people overlook it, then if that's what's going to get reinforced, then then this use of AI is going to be hard, and we can't detect it reliably enough, at least when you think about the stakes of false accusations. AI-enabled fraud. So these are scanning micrographs of materials. Here's some different slides here. Basically, you got this original image, and now this is very difficult for the people in this room, but imagine for a moment you were setting about trying to commit fraud for some of these things, right? And maybe you're doing some, trying to reduce cells if it's a cancer treatment or increase cells if it's some sort of thing. You could take this original image and with a single text prompt put it into an AI and add cells or remove cells just that easily. And would a human looking at these 3 slides, have the sense, even if it was a highly trained cell biologist, is a typical reviewer going to catch that this is definitely AI fraud right here? I don't know. Similar here, you can add objects, remove objects. So you could basically take a single image, reduce something, add something, claim you did some treatment and it changed some things, and that easy. So that's AI-enabled image fraud. Wiley, reputable publisher, announced it's closing 19 journals amid a massive, this is May 2024, so just about a year ago, massive influx of fake papers. The Wall Street Journal reported that 11,300 compromised studies were being retracted and that 19 journals are being shuttered. I'm not editorialized at this moment. Some headlines. Retraction note. Distribution of earthquake activity in mountain area based on embedded system and physical fitness detection of basketball. So this was retracted. I mean, this was a published paper by Springer, right? Okay, this is, everybody knows there's silly journals out there, but this is a reputable publisher. And you can see what it was trying to do. Earthquake activity, that's really important. Mountain area, that part sounds good. Embedded system, that's got like an engineering type vibe. And sports analytics is all the rage these days. Let's just put them all together. Retracted article, sea level height based on big data of Internet of Things and aerobatics teaching in coastal areas. Like there's like 7. I think we should write more than one paper about this topic rather than force it all into this. Seems like we have more than one idea we're working with. And it's funny when you see this, but you think about these are obviously very badly done AI spam by somebody who didn't even care to, probably sent 1 million of them in and a very small number got through. Right? So when you think about if somebody spent even a cursory amount of effort to make the title make some sense, how much harder it would have been to detect. It's probably already out there. AI policies, Taylor and Francis. Everybody's scrambling to try to come up with something. I don't have any, foolproof ideas myself either. It's a very hard problem. Here's AI used as a tool for reference sections. Every single highlighted reference here is in some way doesn't even exist or is incorrect. So I mean, maybe curating the reference section isn't your favorite part of the job, but this would be very embarrassing, right? I mean, because if you put 1, 2, 3, 4, it's like 6 false references in, I think editors might be willing to just say, this is so far below the standard these days that we're rejecting. I think it's going to almost have to be like, it's going to be up to the author to say, the specter of possibly having been used AI, I better not even be standing in the shadow of that. Because if anything looks like it might have been AI, they're going to say, find another journal. I wonder. That's one thing we could try. I don't know. Here's another one. The integration of all these different things provides a good way to improve the quality assessment of e-services in the banking sector. Sounds good so far. Gets all the way through to this. Good luck with your decision. So, I mean, come on. This is AI, right? I don't know. Is it proof? It's hard to say. It's easy. There's things we know and then things we can prove. So what do you do if this comes in the abstract? Good question. In terms of the peer review thing, I mean, I think that this is, a last remaining bulwark. If the humans aren't even reviewing the papers, what can we do? So here's adjectives associated with AI-generated text as increased in peer reviews in scientific papers about AI. So this is the amount of times different words were used across time in peer review for the International Conference on Learning Representations. And you can basically see certain words that models in that era would use a lot, spiked in 2024, a little bit in 2020. So in 2023, some people were beginning to say, hey, I could, do some of my reviews for this conference using AI. And then by 2024, it had skyrocketed. So this slide represents, if you send your paper in, you hope that a human's going to read it. If an AI reads it, should a reviewer get credit for it? I don't know. But this could get out of hand pretty quick. So that's something to think about. And then there's this Goodhart's law, which basically says if you have any metric you're tracking, people abuse it to maximize the metric. So there are some universities where the only thing that matters is the number of papers, and paper mills now, it'd be better to get 20 fake papers out than like 2 actual papers this year. So anytime that it's citations, it's papers, you can use AI. There are AI services that now cite your paper a bunch of times with bots. I have some good ideas. I've published some good ideas. And I just need the algorithm to upvote it a little bit. And the temptation would be there for somebody less scrupulous than this group. Well, maybe I could just get a little bit of a boost from some AI citations. And we don't want to even mess with that. So the basic idea is whatever we're tracking, people are going to over-optimize, and there's no longer going to be a good measure. So what should the behavior science journals have as their AI policies? That's an open question. And is there an opportunity for behavior analysts, for the folks in this room, to maybe even more broadly than just in behavior science, talk about the sorts of things like reinforcement, punishment, different sorts of behaviors? It seems like our moment. So maybe we should give some thought to that as well. All right, thank you so much. I have some references here, and I think we have about 2 minutes if there are any questions.
I think we have time for